Okay, let's talk one last time about a reality that we must not ignore. The reality, quite simply, is there really is a devil. He hates God, he hates you, and he wants not just to hurt you, his interest is harming you only so that he can fully take you out and devour you. Brum bump. How's that feel? Well, I don't really think it matters how it feels because it just happens to be the truth. And Peter does not hold back. So, what does he say about it? Well, first of all, he says, be alert and sober minded because you have an enemy. He's real. He wants to kill you, he wants to devour you. And then he goes on and he says in verse 9, resist him, standing firm in the faith. Resist him. We live in a world full of oxymorons and full of paradoxes. And one of the paradoxes that I see is that we, as a culture, we resist a lot of things. And part of it is our we've been bred for independence, and our declaration of independence is, although it's just me, but it seems like it kind of gets pushed aside. The Constitution seems to be, now a fuzzy, fluid document. I don't like that stuff. If you like it, maybe someday we can have a conversation about it, because I'm not sure I understand why you would, but I don't care. Really, ultimately, that's not. But see, we have this thing about because of our independence, we resist things that we don't like. We get to march and protest. We get to write our, we get to give a piece of our mind on social media, which that's a piece of our mind that generally we could ill afford to lose. We resist because we can, and because we're kind of educated toward that. And yet, there are things that we should resist that we just lay right down and let the truck back over us. For Christians, one of the things that we cannot lay down, that we must resist, is our enemy, the devil. Resist him. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We don't get a technical manual on how do you resist. What does it look like to resist? I know that next, Peter writes, standing firm in the faith. I've said this before, I'm going to touch on it again. You can't stand firm in the faith if you don't know what the faith is, if you haven't dived into it, if you haven't tried to devour and digest what is the faith. And then he goes on to say, and oh, by the way, you're not the only ones who are experiencing this kind of suffering, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And in our world, when I say our, I really mean yours and mine, especially if I don't think there's anybody who's not from America and the West who knows about this, would bother to tune in. So it's just us. But for us, in our world, it's pretty cushy. I like, for instance, my iPad started doing some kooky things. really bugged me. Now I got to figure out, do I get it fixed or do I try to go buy a new one? Well, that's a first world problem. You know what I'm saying? Most of the stuff in my life is generally just inconvenience. There are tragedies. People become deathly ill. People lose their jobs. They lose family members. People lose their lives. Churches divide and do more damage to one another and the reputation of Christ than virtually anything else can. These tragedies happen, but generally, can we admit it? Our lives are pretty simple and easy. Complex and complicated because of all the stuff that we've got in it. But really, it's all about how comfortable can I be? And really, how easy could my life be? Well, that's a good and a bad place to live. The good is it feels good. The bad is we're conditioned to believe that's how it's supposed to be. Peter didn't live in that world. He lived in a world where the conditioning was, it's going to be hard. Suffering is a part of the picture. And as a part of the first generation of Christian believers, he could say to the rest of those in that generation, buckle your seatbelt, which he wouldn't have said that. They didn't have seatbelts, but strap in. You're going to experience suffering. When suffering happens to us, we are shocked, not just surprised, but shocked and dismayed. Have you not? One of the themes of 1 Peter is you're going to suffer. So prepare your heart, prepare your mind, get ready for the suffering. And now we move on to what really amounts to the closing of this whole letter in verse 10. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen. We're going to look at this phrase by phrase, so it's going to take us a while to get through. It's just too powerful of a prayer, too powerful of a blessing to zip through and try to touch the tops of the white caps. No. And the God of all grace. Wow. To me, I've told you this before. That's the biggest, most profound, most powerful concept in all of the Bible. Grace. And God is not just the dispenser of grace. He's not just an agent of grace. He's not just an inventor of grace. He is the God of grace. John writes in 1 John that God is love. So if you're going to talk about what are the primary characteristics of God, what are the biggest, most dominating markers of his nature, you have to start with love. You can't talk about love without grace. I don't think love is possible without grace. Put these two things together. God is love, and he is the God of grace. If you put those two things together, wow. To me, this is an incredibly powerful image. Now, revisit for a minute what is grace? In its most literal sense in the New Testament, grace is a gift. And as you flesh that out, grace is about getting from another something that you could not earn or deserve. It is an event, a moment, an attitude. It is a process. It is all of that. It assumes the need of the recipient and the sufficiency of the giver. So here's something that's hard. I've struggled with this myself, and maybe you haven't. And if you haven't, wow, good for you. But I have, and that is, I was kind of raised under the idea of a scarcity mentality, which says there's only so much. And when it's gone, it's gone. Now that is, that actually, that's true of a few important things. Time, money, energy. In my personal life, I've only got so much money. And when it's gone, I can only spend it once. So on that level, when it's gone, it's gone. Time, nobody gets any more than I do or any less. I get 24 hours a day. When it's gone, it's gone. I can't spend it twice. My energy, I never, from day to day, I'm not quite sure how much energy I truly am going to have. And I've got this little voice in my head that tries to convince me I don't have enough energy to do more than I'm doing, which is usually just sitting on the couch. That voice lies to me all the time. But the truth is, there surely is some limit to the amount of energy I'm going to have, and I can't spend it twice. When it's gone, it's gone. There is this other side of that, an abundance mentality, and that's the side that grace exists on. The abundance mentality says there is more than you could imagine. There is more than you could ever need. And although it can only be spent once, there is more behind that, and more behind that, and more behind that. It's as though there's not just one pie that we slice into pieces, and when the pieces are gone, we're done. It's like when we're done with that pie, there's still another pie. That was hard for me to get my emotional, and mental hands around on this idea of grace. And I'm not blaming anybody for this, but I'm making a confession that I grew up under the idea that God dispensed grace like with an eyedropper. Bleep, bleep, bleep. We only got what we needed. No more. Well, certainly no less, but no more. That was a very limited thing, okay? The more I have dwelt on, meditated on, studied, and experienced God's grace, the more I am convinced it's not like an eyedropper. It's like a fire hydrant. That is, full on. It is not just what I need and no more. It is what I need and so much more. This is the God of all grace. Did you get that? Is that incredible? The God of all grace? All grace finds its source in Him. Kind of like that. So that when I dispense grace, and it seems like that, that's not even the right way to say it. Maybe the way I could say it is when I pass along grace, because I'm not a dispenser. It comes through me sometimes to others. When I am doing that, it's really God's grace, not mine. I kind of like that. I love being a conduit of the grace from the God of all grace. Challenge. Make it your aspiration today to be that conduit. When you see a person, encounter a person, it sounds kind of, warm and fuzzy and all of that. But consider this, would you? When you encounter a person, the question in your heart to yourself and to God is, how could I channel grace? How could I funnel grace? How can the grace of God, the God of all grace, leak out of me and onto them? With all the division in our world, in our country, all the right answers are not going to solve that. Might, being right, will not solve it. Grace will. Okay. I'm in way over my head, and I've taken a minute longer than I meant to, so I'm going to close. Hope I get to connect again this way next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.